Hello! For those who don't know me yet, I am your Storytime reader, Ms Nikki. Welcome to Storytime on this 15th day of August. Today is a special day for all Indians because today is India's Independence Day. It is celebrated every year on August 15th in India. It is similar to the 4th of July in America because it marks the day that India became a free and independent nation from Great Britain. Now, to understand the historic significance of this very important date in Indian history, we need to go back in time to the year 1947. Britain had ruled India for almost 200 years. Many people in India felt that they did not want to be ruled by the British and wanted to govern themselves. It was a long, hard-fought battle for liberation against the British, which was championed by leaders like Mahatma Gandhi. On August 15, 1947, when the clock struck midnight, India began its first Independence Day celebration and its first day free of the British Empire. It also marks the anniversary of what is known as the Partition. With the end of the British rule, new borders were drawn and what had at one time been India suddenly became two different countries. One was India, whose people were mostly Hindu, and the other country became Pakistan, whose people are Muslim. The division of India was called the Partition. Chaos followed the partition. Muslims and Hindus, who all once lived together for hundreds of years, felt unsafe where they had made their homes for generations. Hindus in Pakistan fled their towns and villages to cross the border to India, and many Muslims fled India into Pakistan. 15 million people were displaced. Now you have a quick view of India's Independence Day and partition. Let's go back to the present. For today's read aloud, I chose the book Chachaji's Cup. This picture book story describes the loving relationship between a young boy named Neil, who we see in blue here on the cover, and his Chachaji. Chachaji is a Punjabi word for uncle or great uncle in this story. Chachaji tells Neil stories, and every day he drinks his tea out of the same chipped china cup. One day Neil learns the story behind the cup. Are you curious to learn more about Chachaji's cup? Me too. Let's read. Chachaji's Cup, written by author Krishnaswami and illustrated by Soumya Sitaraman. When cups clinked in the kitchen and the water rolled to a boil, everyone in my family knew it was tea time. I set the table. My parents took care of the tea leaves, but as long as he'd lived with us, and that was as long as I could remember, it was Chachaji, my father's old uncle, who was in charge of tea time. Plain tea today, Neil? He'd ask me. Or shall we have masala chai? And cloves and nutmeg flavors would sing along with the boiling water. My friend Daniel often came to tea at our house. He loved the cucumber sandwiches Mom made and the crisp little cookies from the Indian store. Chachaji called them biscuits. Chachaji would tip food onto our plates and milk into our cups. He'd pour in just enough tea to make the spice flavors dance in our mouths. Then, as we all ate and talked, he'd sip slowly and noisily from his old china teacup. Its white surface was creamy smooth with a spray of pink roses. Its faded gold trim was chipped in spots. It was the only teacup Chachaji ever drank from. Once I forgot and brought him another cup. "No better," he told me. "That's the wrong one." "You really love that old cup," I said to him. "Old cup for an old man," said Chachaji, and he slurped his tea as the steam rose in little curly waves about his silver head. "It was his mother's," Mom told me. "Your great-grandmother's." After tea, Daniel and I often built sandcastles and forts under the deck, using sticks and stones and blocks. Chachaji sat on the deck and watched us. Sometimes he came down and helped us raise a bridge or topple an enemy's defenses. When our mothers finally called us in for homework or baths or bedtime, he was as sorry as we were. Chachaji liked to watch old Hindi movies on videotapes rented from the Indian store. They were loud and funny. Daniel and I watched with him. As each scene unfolded, wilder and louder than the last, Chachaji tried to explain it to us. But he laughed so hard he couldn't finish, so in the end we just giggled along. Chachaji told us stories. He told us about gods and demons. The great monkey god Hanuman picked up the mountain, hit thunder, and there it would be, hanging in the air, a whole mountain. Imagine, he carried the whole mountain. He told us about his days in the Indian army. "We marched across the pass," he whispered, "and it began to snow. And the air would grow chilly in the living room, even in the middle of summer." Once Chachaji told me about the time when India was split in two. He was just a boy then. The country was broken, he said. Suddenly we were two countries, just like that, India and Pakistan. We had to leave our home. We were refugees, millions of us, on both sides of the border. I listened, open-mouthed. "We walked and walked for hours," he said. "We took what we could carry with us," and he sipped his tea noisily from the old chipped cup. I looked at him, and I could see the line of people walking. "Why didn't you take a train or a plane?" I asked. Chachaji's eyes were far away. "We had to walk 20 miles to a place where a car was waiting to bring us across the border to India," he said. "We were lucky. Many people walked all the way, hundreds of miles." I thought about it. Hiking just 2 miles with Dad was hard work. How would 20 feel? Or 100? Every step weighed down with sadness. "This teacup," said Chachaji, "my mother brought it with her at that time in 1947. His voice grew whispery. "So many things we left behind, but she would not leave that cup." I looked at the only photograph we had of my great-grandmother. She seemed far away, in her place on the wall with the other people in my family. Everyone laughed at her for taking a breakable thing like a teacup, said Chachaji, instead of something useful. What would I take, I wondered, if I had to leave home like that? It was unthinkable. She only smiled, Chachaji said. She knew if this cup got to India without breaking, she would get to India without breaking. I almost didn't dare ask. Did she? Chachaji laughed. What do you think? Is that her cup? And is it broken? Yes, I said. No, we laughed together. The year passed. I grew taller. I could stand on tiptoe and reach things I couldn't before. Daniel was still my very best friend, and he still came over for tea sometimes. But afterwards, we went out and shot hoops in the backyard. Chachaji watched from the window and there were no forts to build anymore, no bridges to raise. Sometimes we played computer games. I am too old for computers, said Chachaji. That's what my grandma said Daniel. But we got her one anyway, and now she has email. Chachaji smiled and waved us away. Go play, go play. At my birthday party that year, Chachaji sat with us and ate cake and ice cream. Mom passed plates of spicy samosas and a bowl of fried gulab jamun in sweet syrup. When I blew out all of the candles at once, Chachaji laughed so hard that it set him coughing. Later, he started telling us about birthday parties back in India when he was young. But after a while, his story faded because people began talking about other things. And when he slurped his tea from the old china teacup, it suddenly sounded far too loud. That night, it was my turn to wash the dishes. Washing them, I thought of other things, like the camping trip Daniel and I wanted to go on, and the weekend's basketball game. My hands grew slippery with soap, my thoughts scattered. That was when it happened. The cup fell through my fingers and crashed upon the floor. Its pink roses splintered into a dozen sharp pieces. Oh, Chachaji, I cried. I'm sorry. There was a long and terrible silence. In my mind, I saw a woman walking 20 miles to safety with her son. She held a china teacup as carefully as you'd hold a baby. The image faded. We gathered the pieces of the cup. We put them in a paper bag. Chachaji tucked the bag into a closet shelf in his room. The next week, Dad had to take Chachaji to the hospital. It's his heart, Dad said. They need to run some tests. It's not the first time he'd had trouble with his heart. When we went to see him, Chachaji was a small brown ghost against enormous fluffy hospital pillows. He didn't smile. He didn't smile the next time we went either, or the next. Even though I did my best, I clowned and joked, I twisted my hands into knots and crossed my eyes. All that did was make the nurse frown. The night before we brought him home, I couldn't sleep. I tossed about and dreamed of people becoming refugees, leaving their homes. In my dream, they walked for miles, fleeing with only the things they could carry. The lines they made crossed the wide plains from west to east, from east to west. Some hurried to catch cars and trains that waited to take them clear across the land. Only numbers gave them safety. Only hope gave them strength. I saw Chachaji young and afraid. I saw his mother, my great-grandmother, her fingers curled around that teacup with roses. In the early morning, before even the sun was up, I tumbled awake. Where it came from, I don't know, but an idea burned inside me as bright as the promise of sunrise. I knew what I had to do. I crept to Chachaji's room and searched in his closet, struggling to keep my rummaging quiet. I tiptoed back to my room. I lost track of time. When I finally got into bed, the clock was flashing its way toward morning. My fingers were sticky and tired. A small fat package sat wrapped in brown paper upon my desk. The following afternoon, we wheeled Chachaji down bleach-scented hospital hallways and outside into the sunshine. Before we all loaded into the car, I leaned over and slipped him the fat brown paper package. Chachaji frowned. He pulled the bag open. Slowly, he lifted out the chipped yellow cup. He peered at the glue smudges blurring the broken roses. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you, Beta." "What?" my father asked. "What did you say, Chachaji?" "Nothing," Chachaji smiled. "Let's go home." When we got home, I said, "Chachaji, it's tea time." My parents took care of the water and tea leaves the way they always did. Chachaji sat with his hands folded and watched us bustle about the kitchen. I set out cups and plates for everyone. I placed a cup in front of Chachaji, a plain blue one from our plain blue set. From somewhere like magic, Mom produced a plate of cookies. "My favorite biscuits," Chachaji exclaimed. As we sipped tea and ate, our eyes turned to the mantelpiece. We'd made room there for a cup that had traveled long and far. It wasn't much good for holding tea anymore, but I figured you don't have to be shiny new to hold memories. The end. I love this beautiful story. It has many important themes. My favorite two are family relationships and how they change over time. And the second is how memories are preserved, both in stories and objects. And in this book, the object is the teacup. The teacup survived long, difficult journeys and is a symbol of strength. Chachaji carries many memories of India and a personal account of the history of India's liberation from Britain in 1947. The author, Krishnaswami, grew up in India. I've attached a video link in the description box where the author shares the reason why she writes about the period of partition through Chachaji's cup. So please take a look. I hope you enjoyed this story and it has piqued your curiosity to learn more. I look forward to reading to you again soon. Until then, take care of yourself and each other and stay curious.